jump into chapter 1. There's a lot of setup, and obviously setting up your computer is a pretty significant part of learning Java. If you don't get Java installed, you're not going to be able to compile and run programs. If you don't get the IDE installed, you'll end up having to type programs in some sort of a text editor or something. So these are key to get installed and working. There are a few options with regard to what you download and install. You can check to see if the JDK is installed already on your computer. So the way to do that is to open up a command prompt or a terminal and to type Java -version. And if you have Java installed, what you should see is something along these lines. It says, in my case, it says Open JDK version 14 from March 17th, 2020, blah, 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 blah. So I've got Java installed. Obviously, that's what I teach and what I program in, so I would have it installed. Not a big deal if you don't have it installed. That's what the next slides get into, is how to download it and install it. If you do have it installed, and it's at least say Java 11, 12, 13, 14, you're fine. Even 10 should work, but it had some weird glitches, but anything in the double digits should be fine. All right, so the downloads. First off, the Java JDK and IDE, an integrated development environment. There are options, but I use Eclipse, so everything I do in class will be using Eclipse. So you should probably use Eclipse, but you don't have to. I don't mandate any of this. If you have a favorite one that you already have downloaded and installed, that's awesome. They do have different strengths and weaknesses. I'm just most familiar with Eclipse's strengths and weaknesses. There's a download too for the textbook resources there, which we don't need yet. So it's not urgent that you get those right now. So what about Java? So this is where we got into this last time, and I've tried to be really clear that this is one way to download it, but I say wait, because the Oracle download does not include an installer. That said, it's an open source language and development kit, so there are open source versions that you can get, and that's the next slide, which is easier alternatives. You might just go with the OpenJDK download, which is at the URL that's down at the bottom. You probably won't see the exact same screen I'm seeing. You may see different versions of OpenJDK, but again, any one of the ones that are double digit, so 11, 12, 13, 14 would all be perfectly fine to download. And it will come with some sort of installer for your operating system, and my recollection is it's just super easy to do it. So the next step is you need an IDE, an integrated development environment, to help you code Java apps. There really is no GUI interface to Java in the basic install. There are a bunch of awesome tools built into Eclipse, but we got to get it installed. I've got a link in the keynote. It says go to eclipse.org/downloads, and you should see on the screen something like this: get Eclipse IDE, and then there'll be a number 2020-, and we're probably past 06. We might be at 09, or I'm not sure what you guys will see, but whatever it says, that's what you download. On Windows, I think you get a zip file, and on the Mac you get a DMG file. In either case, you have to double click on it. There's no password. So after it does download, you run it, and it'll run this installer. So it does not download the entirety of Eclipse when you say download 64-bit like that. It just downloads essentially an installer, which when you run it, then that will download and install all the Eclipse components. So it is not as fast as you might hope or wish for. After you open the installer, you get a screen kind of like the one in the screenshot, and then you have to pick which Eclipse do you want. And the one that you want is Eclipse for Java developers. If you install the wrong one, you'll get a version of Eclipse, and technically you can still create Java apps in it, but they'll be very different, and the tools that it installs will be different, and the screen configuration will be different. And as such, it's way, way, way easier from the get-go if you just install the Java developer version. I mean, obviously you'll have to agree to several licenses as it moves along, but I've installed it so many times, and sometimes it just zips down and installs, and you're done in 2 or 3 minutes. And then other installs, it'll get to particular points and then kind of just stop. And I've had cases where Eclipse will pop open a little window that says the install's taking longer than it's supposed to. Do you want to quit it? And I don't ever do that. I always say no, keep doing it, and after a while it will pick back up and finish. So I say that just in case anybody runs into issues like that. I'm going to fire up Eclipse just so that you can see it starting. I have Eclipse in my dock, and it's probably a handy thing to have there or in the Windows taskbar, pinned to your taskbar. So every time Eclipse launches, it's going to ask you, what workspace do you want? And workspace is just Eclipse's terminology for what folder do you want to put the work in that you're about to be working on. So if you see workspace, it's really just a folder. And you can set up a new one. It will default to a location in your documents folder, which may or may not be handy. So that's kind of your first choice, is to think through, okay, where do I want to put my work in this class? Do I have a Java folder, and inside that maybe I've got a program folder or whatever it may be. So anyway, once you launch Eclipse, you will get a window like this, which is essentially a welcome window. It does link to a bunch of tutorials and walkthroughs. If you have the time and want to do that, I strongly recommend it. I don't really teach how to use the IDE in class. I mean, we'll cover, as part of just doing everything, we'll cover a lot of it, but I don't have any topic that's just like, here's an introduction to everything in Eclipse. The thing that you want to maybe think about here is every time you launch Eclipse, it will come to this welcome screen, which you probably don't want. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but if you don't, you can uncheck the always show welcome at startup. If you want it to, you can hit the arrow here which says go to the workbench, which is Eclipse's term for the actual IDE in which you can work. If you do that though, it'll shrink the welcome screen down here and put it at the bottom, which is fine, but the next time you start Eclipse, it'll still be there. And if you keep bypassing it by hitting the workbench button, it'll add copy after copy after copy after copy of those welcome screens. It's the oddest quirk. But anyway, what I do is I uncheck that so that I'm only seeing it once. And then this gets me to the workplace. Let's just talk about the next slide, which is a first app. The process of programming that's going to be typical for us in this class is we're going to launch the IDE or Eclipse in our case. We will create a project folder to do our work in. Inside that, we'll create a Java class. So Java programs are actually classes. When they run, they're objects that are created from the class definition. Step 4, we'll edit the class file. We'll watch for errors and typos. They'll get underlined, as you'll see in a second. We'll fix them, and then we'll run and test. And kind of coding is then this loop where you keep editing and fixing and adding features and editing and fixing and adding features and editing and fixing until you get to a point where you're done, hopefully. I step you through this, I think, really clearly step by step in the textbook and also in the keynote. So you launch Eclipse like you just did. You select the workspace. You can also set it, once you've configured a workspace, you can just tell it always open that workspace, and then you don't get that pop-up choice every time. The UI here is kind of busy. I don't know if you're looking at the same thing on your computer as I'm sharing, but on the left we've got something called the Package Explorer, which is really just a way to look through the folders that are in your development folder, your workspace. There's a big empty gray box in the center, which is going to be the edit window when we're editing Java code. We're not editing Java code. We don't have any Java code to edit at this point, so it's just this big gray block. On the right, there's a task list and an outline. Too often I'm working on a laptop and I need screen real estate and I want this big edit window in the center to be even bigger. So I normally close the task list and close the outline just by hitting the X. At the bottom, we've got kind of a console view of different things. There'll be a list of problems. There could be a list of search results there. When we run the app, we'll get the developer console that spits out any information about how the app is running while it's running. So you don't want to close that. That's pretty essential. So these three areas are pretty essential for being able to use Eclipse. The Explorer, the edit window, which is unlabeled at this point, and then this bottom console area. All right. Step 2 is create a new project. You can use File, New, Java Project. You can actually add a button to your toolbar. They took it off by default, which I hate. So in the outline, I circle the button, but you'll notice there is no button for New Java Project here. So, but there's a big thing here to do it. You can also pull down the File menu and say File, New, and for me it's covered up by the share frame, but I think that's Java Project. I'll do it this way, which is I'm going to hit this link that says Create Java Project. Again, all this is going to do is create a folder to put your work in, but you also get to set it up. You get to name the folder. So project name is the name of the folder. So I'm going to call it Chapter 1. And right off the bat, you'll see I used a space. Spaces are fine as long as your file system can allow spaces in folder names. That's fine. It doesn't have to be a valid Java variable name or anything, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, but pretty much anything you want. You can pick the Java execution environment. So for me, I've got a lot of different ones installed. It does not really matter. Like I said, any double-digit Java version is awesome. And actually, there's nothing else in here I set. So I'm going to hit Finish. So you may get this pop-up that you're seeing in the screen share, which is new module info.java. That's a newer feature of Java, but Eclipse doesn't seem to have fully implemented it really well. And if you specify a module name here, it typically will stop your app from running when we get to that stage. And then you'll have to kind of fix the project workspace. So if you get this window, the one, I don't have it in the keynote, but the one that you're looking at in the screen sharing, I'm going to hit the Don't Create button down here at the bottom. All right, and then the result is nothing all that exciting, right? It looks almost exactly the same, except over here now I've got this folder, Chapter 1. So let's dig into the folder. It's got the system library, or a shortcut to the system library that we're using, and it's got this folder, src. The source folder is for Java source code. That's where we'll put our Java source code. So to get a source code file, we're going to add a new Java class. And there is a button, by default, there's a button for that. It's up in the toolbar, and it looks like it's a green circle with a white C in it and a gold plus. And if you hover over it, it says New Java Class. You could also pull down the File menu and say File, New Java Class. And I'm sure there are a few other ways to do it as well. But I'm just going to push this button. That will launch a second wizard kind of interface. And in fact, it looks pretty similar to the New Java Project interface, but just different options. But we start out at the same kind of idea, which is we need to name it. So the Java class name is going to be limited. Java identifiers, the things that you name in Java, like variables or classes, have to follow a set of rules that we'll talk about in a little bit, but no spaces. It can have letters and numbers. It can be lowercase and uppercase. It can contain the underscore character. So you just have to think, what is it I'm coding? I'm going to code a Hello World app, so I'm going to call it just hello. So all I did was type in hello in the name. If I were to hit a space or something, what we'll see is an error up here. Type name is not valid, must not start or end with a blank. We'll actually pause on this later and talk about more of the options, but I'm just going to hit finish at this point because we're not really customizing anything. So if you are following along, what you should see now is inside the source folder, Eclipse has created a package called default package, and it's created a file called hello.java. It gets hello from our name for the class, and .java says this is a Java class. But also, maybe more importantly now, that big gray blob in the center now actually is an edit window. It's got a tab at the top that says Hello Java, and it's got some code. There are 5 lines of code in the file right now. There's 2 lines that Eclipse has already written for you, which is what's called a class declaration, public class hello. And then the curly braces are used to say where the class begins and ends. In other words, what lines of code that we type are part of the class and what is not part of the class. So for the most part, we'll be typing stuff in between these 2 curly braces. We've got the open curly brace here, and then a closed curly brace, which would denote the last line of our program. So Java doesn't have an end statement like some languages do. Instead, it uses these curly braces to denote beginnings and endings. This is a valid Java program, but it doesn't do anything. So let's move back to the Keynote. Step 4 is type your code. The textbook has this code. The code is also in the Keynote Live, but it's hard to select and paste. So we're just going to type it. And in general, I would encourage you to type stuff because for the most part, we'll be doing typing to create our Java programs. Eclipse doesn't have a drag and drop UI builder. And in fact, we're not going to be all that concerned with UI design for the bulk of the first part of the class. I'm much more interested in, can you get functionality working? Can you take a task that is somewhat complex and decompose it into simpler parts that you can code and order correctly? That's the core of being able to code in any language, and that's what we're going to focus on in Java. A lot of the code that I'm going to type, or some of the code that I type, may not certainly be familiar or make sense, and we will come back to all of it. But all Java programs need something called a main method. The main method is what Java calls a function, and it is a block of code that will be run automatically when your program starts. So whatever we put in main is going to run at the time the app is double clicked on or started from Eclipse. The thing about the main method is it has to be typed virtually exactly as you see in the Keynote Live or in the textbook. So I'm going to type it. If you want to, type along with it. We're going to type, there we go, public static void main. So just 4 words, public static void main. And then we're going to type an open parenthesis. Then I'm going to type the word string, followed by an open and closed square bracket. And then convention in Java is what we're defining inside these parentheses is a parameter that gets passed to the main method. These are also called arguments sometimes. So the convention in Java is to call the parameter args, A-R-G-S. But I always call it args with 2 R's because that's parity, and it doesn't make a difference. That's the one thing you could change is whatever you call the parameter. And then I'm going to type an open brace and hit return, and what you'll notice when I hit return is Eclipse supplies the close brace automatically. So I did not have to type that. You might also notice that Eclipse is indenting the code automatically and also colorizing it. Keywords are kind of that purplish color, and args looks like maybe brown. Other stuff is black, and other colors will pop up as we do stuff. So inside the main method, what you do is you essentially kick off your program. You configure what it looks like on screen. So we'll use the main method to do stuff like declare how big the app window is, set the name and the title bar of the app window, determine whether it can be resized or not. All sorts of stuff about the app itself, once it launches, we're going to configure in the main method. So in the Keynote, I've got kind of the full official way to do a hello world, but you can also simplify it and just do it like this. Oh, sorry. I need system.out.println, and then in quotes, hello world. So this is actually, I think this is the code that was in the table that I had last time that had Java code, Lua code, and Malboge code. I think this is the way I did it in there. It's a little bit different than the Keynote Live. If you're following along, either way is fine. If you typed it out the other way, I mean, stick to that. What I would look for here is, first off, there are no red underlines. There's nothing that the IDE is telling me is a caution. So we need to save it and run it. What I'm going to do is hit the green run button, which is up here, sort of looks like a play button. All right, and Eclipse is going to say, hey, you've edited this file and you haven't saved it, because I quote unquote forgot to save it. I didn't save it. But the thing is, for me at least, anytime I press run, I want to see the latest version of the code that I've been editing. So I always want it to save before running. So there is a checkbox here, which is off by default, but you can see it says always save resources before launching. So at least in my mind, I always wanted to do that. And you might wonder then, if I always check that, why isn't it checked? And the answer is, every new workspace starts out with default settings. So once you check that in a given workspace, then it will stay checked, and you won't have to ever deal with this again. So I checked it. I'm going to press OK. And if you're watching the screen waiting for a window to pop up or something fantastic to happen, you might be disappointed because nothing apparently fantastic happens. But the output is down here in this console area. That's what the system out println statement does, is it takes whatever text you type here and displays it in the terminal. So the Hello World application is an application that essentially verifies for you that, hey, I have everything downloaded and set up. It's working. I'm good to move on to something something more involved. In terms of errors and stuff, any sort of typo, if you miss a letter, you get letters out of order. For the most part, you'll get a red underline and a little light bulb. These icons, at least on my system, are so small, but you can see there's a miniature light bulb and a red X. If you click on that, Eclipse will offer to fix it if it knows potentially how to fix it. Sometimes, though, it will offer to fix it and the fix is not right. So you want to be careful about, don't just pick the automatic fix. Read it and see if it makes sense. And you can see in this case, it's actually offering to spell it correctly, which is remarkably helpful. You double click there and it will fix it. You could have also hovered over it and gotten a very similar little dialogue that offered to fix it. But in that one, when you select the fix, you single click it. So you'll play around with it and get the hang of the little differences in the UI. There are certainly lots of possible mistakes that you could make at this point. I've got a coverage in the book on a couple of pages, 22, 23, around that area. There's a table that kind of lists out all the common ways people make mistakes in terms of misspellings, miscapitalizations, missing or extra braces, brackets, parentheses, quotation marks is very common. Invalid identifiers, having a space in something you can't have a space in, stuff like that is pretty common. But in general, Eclipse will try to point out exactly where the issue is and will prompt you with an error message and maybe even provide you with what Eclipse calls a quick fix to solve the issue. The first homework problem in the chapter is say hello to yourself. So hey, say hello to your name, whatever it is, where your name is actually your name, not your name. So all you have to do is edit that print line a little bit and then rerun it. So it should be a piece of cake, but there are certainly ways to, again, to forget a quotation mark or to just do something syntactically that will throw Java.